Hey y'all, I'm back with another motherfucking video. And in this video, we are going to be having a look at the book by Kevin Powell called The Confessions of a Recovering Misogynist. Let's get into it. So this is the book. He's talking about how he became a misogynist in the first place. So we're just going to read along because this shit is so interesting. So he says, I am a sexist male. I take no great pride in saying this. I'm merely stating a fact. It is not that I was born this way. Rather, I was born into a male-dominated society, and consequently, from every moment I began forming thoughts, they formed in a decidedly male-centered way. My education at home with my mother, at school, on my neighborhood playgrounds, and at church all placed males as the center of the universe. My digestion of 1970s American popular culture in the form of television, film, ads, and music only added to my training. So that by an early age, as early as 9 or 10, I saw females, including my mother, as nothing more than servants to males. Indeed, like the Fonz on the TV sitcom Happy Days, I thought I could snap my fingers and girls would come running. My mother, working poor and a product of her conservative and patriarchal South, simply raised me as most women are taught to raise their boys. The world was mine. There were no chores to speak of, and my aggressions were considered somewhat normal, something that boys carry out as a rite of passage. Those rites included me routinely squeezing girls' butts on the playground. And at school, boys were encouraged to do boy things like work and build with our hands, fight each other, and participate in the most daring activities during our gym time. Meanwhile, the girls were relegated to home economics, drawing cute pictures, and singing in the school choir. But they say we're not raised to be wives, right? Now that I think about it, school was the place that spearheaded the omission of women from my worldview. Save Betsy Ross, whom I remember chiefly for sewing a flag, and a stoic Rosa Parks, she was unfurled every year as an example of Black achievement. I recall virtually no women making appearances in my American history classes. The church my mother and I attended, like most Black churches, were peopled mainly by Black women, most of them single parents who dragged their children along for the ride. Not once did I see a preacher who was anything other than an articulate, emotionally charged, well-coiffed, impeccably suited Black man running this church, and truly these women. And behind the pulpit of this Black man, where he convinced us we were doomed to hell if we did not get right with God, was the image of our Savior, a male, always white, named Jesus Christ. Not surprisingly, the Savior I wanted in my life was my father. 10 years her senior, my father met my mother. My father wooed my mother. My father impregnated my mother. And then my father, as per his socialization, moved on to the next mating call. Responsibility was about as real to him as a $3 bill. When I was 8, my father faulty told my mother via payphone that he felt she lied, that I was not his child, and that he would never give her money for me again. Now, keep in mind, the manosphere has been on this big kick about paternity fraud. So this is the excuse that they're now using to get out of fatherhood, even today. And then he goes on to say, the one remotely tangible image of maleness in my life was gone for good. Both my mother and I were devastated, albeit for different reasons. I longed for my father's affections, and my mother longs to be married. Silently, I began to blame my mother for my father's disappearance. Reacting to my increasingly bad behavior, my mother turned resentful, and her beatings became more frequent, more charged. I grew to hate her and all females, for I felt it was women who made men act as we do. At the same time, my mother, a fiercely independent and outspoken woman, despite having only a grade school education and being poor, planted within me the seeds of self-criticism, of shame for wrongful behavior, and ultimately of feminism. Clear that alone would have to shape me. My mother spoke pointedly about my father, and many years after that call, demanding that I not grow up to be like him. And I noted the number of times my mother rejected low-life male suitors. I'm going to read that again. I noted the number of times my mother rejected low-life male suitors, particularly the ones who wanted to live with us for free of charge. So women ain't out here constantly making bad choices. That's why I wanted to read that twice. And then he says, I can see now that my mother is a feminist, although she is not readily familiar with the term. Like many women before and since, she fell hard for my father and only thought during immense pain, and only through immense pain did she realize the power within herself. I entered Rutgers University in the mid-1980s, and my mama's boy demeanor advanced to that of pimp. I learned quickly that most males in college are some variety of pimp. Today, I lecture regularly from campus to campus all over the country, and I see not much has changed. For college is simply a place where we men, irrespective of race or class, can do and act out sexist attitudes entrenched since boyhood. R-word, infidelity, girlfriend beatdowns, and emotional abuse are common, and pimpdom reigns supreme. There is an athlete pimp, the frat boy pimp, the independent pimp, and the college professor pimp. Buoyed by the anti-apartheid movement and the presidential bids of Jesse Jackson, my social conscience blossomed along racial lines, and behold, the student leader pimp was born. Blessed with the gift of gab, a poet's sensibility, and an acute memory for historical facts, I baited women with my self-righteousness by quoting Malcolm X, Frantz Fanon, Machiavelli, and any other figure I was sure they had not studied. It was a polite form of sexism, for I was always certain to say my sister, my queen, grand rising, when I addressed women at Rutgers. But my politeness did not lend me tolerance for women's issues, which is still going on today, y'all. Nor did my affiliation with the variety of Black nationalist organizations, especially the Nation of Islam. Indeed, whenever women in our African Studies Congress would question the behavior of attitudes of men, I would scream, we don't have time for those issues. You can see what it says here, but I don't want to get my video muted. My scream was violent, mean-spirited, and made with the intention to wound. So they've been doing this shit for the longest. This book was written in the, he grew up in the 70s and 80s. And I want to hone in on that because remember, they say that we've been bullying them for 60 years. But he's not the only man who thinks like this during that time. So no, we have not been bullying them. This book proves that they were the fucking bullies. So it says he did that with the intention to wound and hurt the women who were asking about their rights, which is exactly what they're doing to us now on these social media apps whenever we call them out on their behavior. He says, I don't think it was any coincidence that during my 4 years in college, I did not have one relationship with the woman that lasted more than 3 or 4 months. For every friend or girlfriend who would dare question my deeds, there were literally hundreds of other pick-me's who acquiesced to the ways of us men, making it easy for me to ignore the legitimate cries of feminists. Besides, I had taken on the demanding role of pimp, conqueror, and campus revolutionary. There was little time or room for real intimacy, and even less time for self-reflection. So I'm almost out of time for my 10-minute video, but we're going to have to make this a series. Consider this part 1. There will definitely be a part 2 followed up with this, and probably 3, 4, and 5, depending on how long it takes me to get through all of this material. But ladies, this stuff is not new. The shit that men are doing now on this app had been done throughout the US. They just never had podcasts until now. So none of this stuff is new. This is how they've always felt about us. And we're going to continue having a look at this book. So be sure to stick around for part 2.